What if I told you that almost everything you learned about Harriet Tubman was only part of the story? What if the figure remembered in textbooks as the brave woman who guided enslaved people north on the Underground Railroad was, in reality, something far greater? An intelligence operative, a military commander, a healer, and even a mystic who claimed to be guided by visions. How could someone born into slavery, beaten and scarred from childhood, rise to become one of the most feared names among slaveholders and one of the most respected among Union generals? And why is it that her story has been simplified, reduced to just one chapter, when her life spanned nearly a century of struggle, faith, and service? Today, we are going to uncover the real Harriet Tubman, the fighter, the visionary, the liberator, whose life was more astonishing than legend. Harriet Tubman entered the world as Araminta Ross around 1822 in Dorchester County, Maryland. Like many enslaved children, her exact birth date was never recorded, because to the system that claimed ownership over her, she wasn't a child with a birthday worth remembering, she was property. Her parents, Harriet Ritt Green and Ben Ross, worked hard not just to endure slavery, but to shield their children from its cruelties. Yet the reality of bondage made that impossible. By the age of 5, Minty, as she was called, was hired out as a nursemaid. She was barely old enough to hold herself upright, yet she was expected to rock babies to sleep, sweep floors, and cook meals. If she failed, or the babies cried too long, she was whipped. By her teenage years, she was laboring in the fields, cutting timber alongside grown men, hauling 100-pound loads, wading into freezing rivers to trap muskrats. Slavery trained children to labor before they even understood life. But Harriet developed a toughness that would serve her later. Then came the turning point. When she was around 13, she found herself in a store as an enslaved man tried to flee. The overseer ordered Harriet to help restrain him. She refused. The overseer, enraged, hurled a heavy iron weight. It struck Harriet in the skull with tremendous force. She collapsed, bleeding and unconscious. For weeks, she hovered between life and death, her family certain she would not survive. But she did survive, and with survival came change. For the rest of her life, she suffered seizures, headaches, and sudden blackouts. Yet alongside the suffering came something she believed was a gift: visions. She claimed she could hear God's voice, see warnings in her dreams, sense danger before it struck. To skeptics, these were the symptoms of brain trauma. To Harriet, they were proof that she walked under divine protection. These visions became the foundation of her courage. Where others hesitated, she stepped forward, convinced God was guiding her path. Out of injury, she forged belief. Out of pain, she drew purpose. Already scarred, already tested, Harriet was becoming something extraordinary, a fighter who saw her struggle not as her own, but as a mission laid before her. By 1849, Harriet's life reached another breaking point. Her enslaver had died, and the estate faced division. She feared what she knew too well: families torn apart, siblings sold away, parents separated forever. Harriet had already witnessed sisters carried off in chains, disappearing into the deep South, never to be seen again. She refused to let it happen to her. With nothing to lose, she planned her escape. Under cover of darkness, she set out, guided only by the North Star and the whispered directions of sympathetic strangers. She traveled through woods, across marshes, sleeping under trees and eating little. Slave catchers roamed the land, eager for reward money. Yet she pressed on. After nearly 100 miles, she reached Philadelphia. For the first time in her life, she was free. She later said, "When I found I had crossed that line, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came up like gold through the trees, and I felt like I was in heaven. But heaven felt empty. Her family was still enslaved. Freedom meant nothing if she had to enjoy it alone." Harriet soon made a decision that set her apart. She would go back, not once, but over and over. Most escapees never dared return. But Harriet Tubman returned to the South 13 times across the next decade. She rescued about 70 enslaved people directly, including her brothers, her parents, and countless others. She also gave instructions and directions that helped many more to freedom. Her methods were brilliant. She used disguises, sometimes dressing as a ragged old woman with a bonnet pulled low, other times passing as a man to slip through unnoticed. She used songs with hidden messages, singing spirituals whose lyrics doubled as coded directions. She carried a pistol, not just to fend off slave catchers, but as a deterrent for fear. She told those she led, "Once you start, there is no turning back." If someone threatened to quit and go home, she reminded them that freedom was the only option. Death was better than slavery. Harriet's missions were planned with precision. She knew safe houses where allies waited. She understood when patrols shifted and how to move quietly under moonlight. Slaveholders were infuriated. They posted rewards for her capture, calling her Moses because she led her people out of bondage. Yet no one ever collected. Harriet was never caught, never betrayed, never lost a passenger. She became a living legend, a ghost. The Underground Railroad could have defined Harriet Tubman's life forever, but when the Civil War broke out, she found herself with an even bigger battlefield. From the moment war began in 1861, she knew this was the opportunity to destroy slavery at its root. She volunteered with the Union Army, first as a nurse, caring for black soldiers and for formerly enslaved people fleeing to Union lines. But Harriet's true potential could not be contained in a sick tent. She had knowledge the Union desperately needed. She understood the geography of the South, the rivers, the backwoods, the hidden trails. She could move unseen. She could organize networks of scouts. And she had authority, a commanding presence that made others follow her without hesitation. The Union recognized her value, and Harriet Tubman became something no one expected: a spy and a scout. She worked with networks of freedmen and Union loyalists, infiltrating plantations, gathering intelligence, mapping Confederate defenses. She was not just gathering scraps of information, she was coordinating a system of intelligence. In 1863, she took part in her most famous operation, the Combahee River Raid in South Carolina. On June 1st, under cover of night, Union gunboats slipped onto the river. Harriet Tubman stood at the front, guiding them through waters seeded with Confederate mines. She had scouted the area, identifying plantations ripe for attack. When the boats struck, Union soldiers burned rice fields, destroyed Confederate supplies, and freed enslaved people by the hundreds. The raid liberated more than 700 people in a single night, the largest mass emancipation of enslaved people in the Civil War. Harriet Tubman had planned it, guided it, and led it. She remains the only woman in American history to have commanded a military raid. Yet, for decades, her role was dismissed or ignored. Male generals were praised. Tubman was described as an assistant, a helper. The truth was too disruptive for history to accept. A formerly enslaved black woman had outmaneuvered Confederate defenses and led one of the greatest liberation events of the war. Harriet Tubman was not just a conductor, she was a general. Even while she fought as a spy and commander, Harriet played another vital role: healer. In military camps, disease killed more soldiers than bullets. Dysentery, typhoid, and smallpox ravaged troops and refugees. Harriet carried knowledge of plants and herbs, a mix of African traditions, native remedies, and her own experience. She brewed teas from roots, made poultices from leaves, and treated wounds with natural medicine. Soldiers trusted her when conventional doctors failed. To them, she was not only a fighter, but a caretaker. At the same time, her visions continued. She would change routes at the last moment, delay departures, or insist on detours, claiming divine warning. Again and again, she avoided patrols and ambushes. Her followers believed she had supernatural protection. Slaveholders whispered that she was a conjure woman, shielded by powers beyond their reach. Harriet herself credited God, saying she was only his instrument. Whether these were neurological episodes, keen intuition, or true spiritual visions, their impact was real. People followed her because she seemed to walk with destiny. She was at once practical and mystical, a figure who embodied faith as a weapon. This combination of healer, mystic, and warrior made her presence larger than life. She was not only fighting a war of guns, but a war of spirits. When the Civil War ended, you might expect Harriet Tubman to finally receive recognition, payment, and honor for her service. Instead, she returned to poverty. The government refused for years to grant her a pension for her military work. Bureaucrats claimed there was no official record of her service, though soldiers testified to her role. She survived on donations, on the kindness of friends, on speaking tours where she told her story. Yet Harriet never turned inward. She gave what little she had. In Auburn, New York, she opened her home to the poor and elderly. She raised money for schools and churches. She advocated for women's suffrage, speaking on stages alongside Susan B. Anthony and Sojourner Truth. In her later years, she founded the Harriet Tubman Home for the Aged, determined to provide dignity to those forgotten by society. Even in poverty, she lived in service. She had never fought for herself alone. She had always fought for her people. When she died in 1913, she was finally buried with military honors. The nation that had denied her recognition in life at least gave her respect in death. But her community had never doubted her. To them, she was always a soldier, a saint, a leader. What does Harriet Tubman's story mean today? She is remembered as Moses, the conductor who led enslaved people to freedom. But that is only one piece. She was a general who led a raid that freed hundreds. She was a spy who coordinated networks of intelligence. She was a healer who saved lives with herbs and roots. She was a mystic who claimed visions and acted as though God's hand guided her every step. She was a suffragist who demanded women's equality. She was a caretaker who built homes for the elderly. She was complex, human, scarred, and extraordinary. Yet history simplified her, reducing her to a single symbol. Why? Perhaps because the full truth is too disruptive. The idea that a poor, illiterate enslaved woman could outwit slaveholders, Confederate officers, and even government officials is a challenge to the very myths America tells itself. But that is who Harriet Tubman was. She reminds us that freedom is not given. It is seized. It is defended. It is lived. She shows us that resistance is not one act, but a lifetime. And she proves that greatness can come from the most unlikely places. So now that you know the fuller story, what do you think of Harriet Tubman? Does seeing her as not only a conductor, but also a general, a spy, a healer, and a mystic change the way you view American history? What if every classroom taught her not just as a symbol, but as a strategist, a leader, a force? How would that change the way we understand what ordinary people can do against impossible odds? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below with your reflections and your suggestions for the next video in this series. And if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next untold chapter of true American history.